There is a spectre haunting Europe, the spectre of austerity. Across the continent this summer, people have been protesting against cuts in their salaries and rising unemployment. Nowhere has this anger been expressed more deeply or more freely than in the birthplace of Western democracy.
Strikes and demonstrations are not unusual in Greece. Almost every week there is industrial action by one sector or another. But this country has not seen anything on this scale since the toppling of the dictatorship 35 years ago.
Athens' regular demonstrations have taken on a ritualized nature. Part theatre, part comedy. The workers march into Syntagma Square and make their voices heard in front of the National Parliament. There is a face-off. If rocks are thrown by the protesters, tear gas is used by the police. Then everyone goes home. But not on the 5th of May. As Greece's MPs debated how deep to cut, workers stormed the parliament. Buildings were set on fire, and 3 people were burnt to death.
People are angry, and there is a rising level of struggle in Greece. In the last 2 years, we can count 30 general strikes. On May the 5th, we had the biggest general strike ever organized in this country, with 1 million in the streets.
The politicians lied about the size of the deficit. This lying, this was instrumental in creating this crisis for Greece. Politicians have played a tremendous role at bringing the country and the economy to the brink of disaster.
There's very much this sense now that it's become a sort of us and them society, that there's the top tier, the elite, who run things, and there's the rest, you know, the working people, the people who pay taxes, who can't seem to have influence on this system.
The worst case scenario for Greece is simply enough. If the government doesn't succeed in restoring growth quickly enough, then the social pain of the austerity measures for the Greek people will be enormous. And of course there is a question mark on how long they can endure it.
As public service budgets are cut to the bone and unemployment rises across Europe, should its elected leaders worry that the whole continent will go the way of Greece? Or is this simply a country on the periphery that has lived too far beyond its means for far too long? A somber cleanup the day after the demonstrations. An outpouring of national grief for the victims and for their families. No one has claimed responsibility for the firebombs thrown into the bank, nor explained why a bank situated in the heart of the protest was open on the day of a general strike when others remained tightly shuttered. A seemingly senseless provocation which cost the lives of 3 bank workers, including a pregnant woman. In the National Parliament, the government blamed the far left for the violence and the deaths, passing the first reading of the austerity bill after a moment of silence for the dead.
They try to use the dead working people in the bank in order to push more for their measures. It was so cynical, their behavior, that the same day that they were attacking the left, they were voting the measures in the parliament.
An organizer of anti-war and anti-racism campaigns, PETROS was outside Marfin Bank when the fire started. He believes that responsibility for the deaths lies with the politicians and the bank's owners.
They wanted to strike from the morning. They said to their bosses that we don't want to stay, and they answered to them, if you go, tomorrow you will not be at the work. And they closed the front door of the building. When we came there and we saw the fire, we tried to open the door, but it was impossible because The building, it was a trap. All the doors were closed. So the banker is guilty for this. The people could escape, but the police, they didn't leave the fire cars to come there. First, they wanted to disperse the demonstrators with tear gas, which is madness. I mean, for half an hour, they were attacking the demonstrators.
Do you think that, despite this explanation, that in effect, the left has been tainted with what's happened?
These people are not part of the movement, but we have to be very clear that these actions flourish only when the police is attacking a mass, collective and organized demonstration, as it was the demonstration on the 5th May.
Demonstrators may feel trapped, but so is the Greek government. Conservative estimates place Greece's national debt at 300 billion euros. On the 19th of May, Greece was due to pay back 8.5 billion, something it could not do. Forced to go to the International Monetary Fund and the EU, a bailout was agreed on the condition Greece accepted the IMF's traditional remedy, austerity. The public sector would be shrunk, salaries cut, sales tax increased, pensions reduced, and the retirement age raised. But the introduction of such drastic economic measures threatens to further exacerbate the problem of Greek political violence.
Over the last year, there have been a series of violent attacks targeting government buildings and institutions like this one. But the bomb that was left here in a cruel and tragic twist of fate ended up killing and wounding members of a family who'd fled to Greece in order to escape violence.
Mohammed and his wife ZAHRA fled Afghanistan after 3 members of their family were murdered by the Taliban. They now live with their daughter Frishtan in a cramped apartment in Athens. Until April, there was their son Hamidullah too, now only evidenced by a poster on the wall.
I could never have believed that this would happen in Greece, in a democracy. The UN promised it would be safe here, but it's all upside down. There's no peace here.
Can you tell me what actually happened with Hamidullah?
My family was walking home in the evening. They were in front of a government building, and there was a bag on the steps, and Frishtan opened it and found there was a watch. She shouted to her brother, "There's a watch." And when Hamidullah picked it up, the bomb exploded. He was blown into pieces, and Frishtan was blinded. Her right eye is gone. It's full of metal. Her left eye, she sees only 5 or 10%.
The childish pictures she draws are, she says, of the bomb site and the people who blew up her brother. She says she no longer wants to leave the house or go to school.
How has all of this affected Farishta?
She has been crying so much from when she first woke up, asking for Hamidullah. We had to tell her that he had died, but she doesn't believe us. She says he has gone back to Afghanistan.
Mohammed, what do you want to happen now?
The police should inform me what has happened with the killers of my son and what they are doing to catch the terrorists. So far, the government have told me nothing.
But the bomb which killed Hamidullah is one of several that have exploded recently on the streets of Athens. Mostly small devices, but there have also been more ambitious attacks on the US Embassy, the stock exchange, prisons and banks.
There was a tradition of political violence created during the years of the dictatorship, when many people looked to that kind of action to oppose the military. Now it's coming back.
Panos has seen 4 decades of demonstrations on the streets of Athens. He thinks it is important to distinguish the violence of the mass movement politics which overthrew the dictatorship in 1974 from the groups who are carrying out the attacks today.
It's very hard to tell who these people are. There have been some texts sent after there have been bombing attempts and so on, where they denounce the system. The way they speak, they're of an anarchist background, but there's no way of telling whether these people have any links with the anarchists that we see on the streets of Athens. I think they are two separate things. I think they are isolated and they will stay isolated as long as the mass movement is growing.
Ordinary Greeks who have joined this mass movement are nevertheless caught in this violence, and some, like those in the Marfin Bank, have paid a heavy price. At a candlelit vigil for the victims, the sadness is clear, but also the continuing anger towards the government.
If people are throwing bombs, then there is something wrong with the corrupted government. I was here and I fell on the street 3 times in order to cover myself from policemen hitting us, basically. The IMF is asking millions of euros within the next 2, 3, 4 months. That's impossible. We are going to become Argentina. That's what's going to happen. People demonstrating all the time. And this is just the beginning.
It is easy to forget that for all its ancient monuments, the Greek nation is less than 200 years old. And that despite the symbols of the golden age of Athenian democracy that fill its capital, its own democracy only emerged after the overthrow of the US-backed military dictatorship in 1974.
When the junta collapsed, the main slogan on the demonstrations was that the CIA and NATO have betrayed the Greek people. When people heard that the IMF would be coming to Greece, there was an immediate connection with this past. We don't want to go back to the days where the American ambassador could dictate policies to a Greek government.
The years of the dictatorship and the violence they brought still hold an important place in the Greek psyche. The 17th of November, 1973. The day on which the army's tanks smashed through the gates of the Athens Polytechnic to suppress a students' uprising is solemnly remembered each year. Graffiti on the walls show that for many, the struggle is not over.
When Greece became part of the European Union, there was a lot of feeling that now things will go for the better. There were high hopes that Greece will converge with Western Europe in terms of living standards, in terms of freedoms, civil rights and so on. Now this is not happening. People have the feeling that the European Union has betrayed them, that we are going backwards to the days where Greek policy could be dictated from outside Greece.
This animosity might seem irrational, given that this country has benefited greatly from its 30-year membership of the EU.
I think for a very long period, Greeks and other countries in the periphery saw Europe as being a distributive mechanism by which funds were transferred from the rich countries of the north to the poorest countries of the south. Obviously, Germans don't have the same impression. I mean, they don't see the Eurozone as being something which will allow Greeks to live off the hard-earned wages of the Germans.
Takis MICHAS has written extensively about Greek political culture. He believes that behind the public outrage, Greeks have no illusions as to where the problems lie.
It's much more a question of pride, and it's much more a reaction to what foreigners say. When Greeks talk among themselves, they recognize that we have some major problems. The whole political system in Greece for the past 200 years has been based on the fact that we give you votes and you provide us favors. And favors primarily has meant giving you a job in the civil service. And this has led to an overgrown public sector. If you go to many offices, public offices, ministry offices in Greece, there are more people than there are chairs and desks. I would expect at this point we have around 1 million civil servants in Greece. They just employ people and they have nothing to do.
Far from changing Greek politics, entry into the EU and the euro served only to exacerbate this problem. But now, with Europe and the IMF breathing down its neck, this same civil service is the obvious target for the austerity measures the government has been forced to agree. The civil servants themselves feel they have been made a scapegoat for the failures of the political class and the business elite.
The people that work on the civil services are very angry about what's happening now. Because of our position, we are able to know what happens with public revenues and public expenditure.
You see this as civil servants? Because you're on the inside.
Yes, we're on the inside and we see it every day. We see that there are so many public works that are given to private companies and they're overcosted, too much overcosted. You know, bridges, roads, even museums. We paid double and 3 times their prices.
Because it's going to the private sector.
They misspend public money. They don't care about public earnings. We have, from last year, 6 million uncollected taxes.
That's half the population.
Yeah, 6 million, yes. And who do you need to collect the taxes? The civil servants. And you know that we have so many problems doing our work because of our ministers and our governments. You know that you go somewhere to collect money from uncollected taxes, and if the owner of the company is someone's friend, someone's in the government, they just call you and tell you, okay, let him go, I'll control that. You know, we have so many interfering in our work, and it's always in favor of big companies, of ship owners, of bankers. They never let us do our job right.
Many in the private sector, however, also feel a high degree of frustration with the politicians.
You start from bureaucracy. To get a license to do a certain kind of business, and we're talking about a business that is strategic or has, let's say, you need special permits for it. I don't know how many months you need just to get the permit. You need to bribe, you need to wait, and even after the months, maybe you haven't filled the paper right and you have to wait again. It has been a mess.
Harry VAFIAS, the scion of one of Greece's shipping dynasties, became the youngest CEO on the US stock exchange when he expanded the VAFIAS group into liquid petroleum gas in 2005. He is unapologetic about the family-run nature of his business and the opportunities it has brought. He believes that many Greeks have only themselves to blame.
The Greek young generation do not have motivation. That is the problem. They want to finish their job at 3 p.m. They want to have 2 mobile phones. They want to have a car since they are 18 years old. And they want to have a holiday house and live with their family in order not to have to pay a rent. How are these people are going to make money and going to have talent? This is just having a good time. You know, getting 1,000 euros as wage, doing a very simple job without stress and living your life. You have to sweat to make money, especially in Greece and especially nowadays.
Do you think that's a fair criticism when people say that essentially the wealthy sort of families, business families, and the political class are one and the same?
The foreigners, you know, they see one bad example and they think that that applies for everything, which that's not true, as you know. Obviously, there are politicians that are rotten apples. Obviously, there are businessmen that do dealings with the government and bribe and whatever, but obviously you cannot put everyone in the same basket. The same with the governments. Not all the politicians are bad, not all the politicians are stupid, no. There are examples of both. Unfortunately, the majority were inefficient up to last year. I'm hopeful that in today's government, if they get the cooperation from the European Union, you will see that by 2011, 2012, the image will be far, far better here.
This optimism is a rare commodity in Greece. For many Greeks on low wages, the future does not look so bright.
So far, I will lose 2,350 euros a year. I expect to lose more when they cut the Christmas bonus. This is money I need for my family to live on, so there are already bills I cannot pay.
CHRISTOS, a municipal employee, has been working as a mechanic since he was 13, and after 35 years in work was already due to start taking his pension. The austerity measures will make him wait another 12 years and reduce his pension by 30% with the threat of worse to come.
Do you think that these measures inevitable and basically unstoppable.
Workers already have few rights and still they take more. The unions have not yet succeeded in achieving anything, but more action is planned this summer as we expect things to get far worse. People being fired and unemployment rising. Workers are trying to make a difference through strikes. As it is, we can't pay our rent, we can't survive.
It is this sense of disappointed expectation that has led to the mass demonstrations in recent months and which has directed people's anger.
People think that their politicians have not only failed them, but have been corrupt, incompetent. Not only have they been working hand in hand with the bankers, but that they've been robbing the state. They've been using the public sector to achieve their party political goals.
In terms of strikes, how extensive is protest and strikes?
It's like a reflex reaction, really, especially from the unions. They don't like something, they take to the street. And part of the reason they do it, and it continues to happen, is that it's worked in the past. For instance, we're now seeing Greece adopt pension reforms. Governments in the past, at the start of the last decade, tried to adopt similar pension reforms, but were shouted out by the unions, who brought hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. And because it's worked so far, they continue to do it.
Do you sense, though, in terms of how you're covering events here, that the strikes are not going to get round this kind of medicine that Greece is being forced to swallow?
I think that's the important word, being forced to, because if this was a question of a Greek government adopting it itself, I think, you know, there's probably not a person in this room that wouldn't tell you that at some point they would buckle, they would water down the measures, because that's what's been happening for the last 30-odd years. I think the fact that the EU, the IMF are involved in this, and that Greece reached such a low point, was on the precipice of financial collapse, means there are no other options, that we really have to adopt these measures, and no amount of strikes, no amount of shouting, no amount of fighting in the streets is going to change that.
But strikes are all that Christos and his colleagues have left. And despite the casualties, the protests show no sign of abating.
We have already shocked the state with our demonstrations. We have more planned. We are showing the government we can fight back.
The anger remains tangible, and the resolve of the unions to fight this to the death undiminished. Without fanfare, the first 5.5 billion euros arrived from the IMF, averting the risk of immediate default. But with other figures showing the economy shrinking and unemployment rising, few are reassured.
When we had our last elections, we didn't vote for the IMF. We voted for a Greek government. So they have to do something for this country. The whole EU has to change politics. Greece is the first. Italy, Portugal, and other countries come after us. Okay. So it's a matter of for the whole EU. Who is going to pay for this crisis?
In Athens, it's hard to believe that this is a country in the grip of austerity. But according to the government's income tax returns, this is already a poor country. Officially, only a few thousand of Greece's 11 million population claim to earn over 100,000 euros a year. A difficult figure to swallow when Piraeus' marinas are filled with motor yachts worth millions. As Prime Minister Papandreou brings in tax rises and job cuts to reduce the 300 billion euro national debt, Greeks are asking themselves where all the money has gone.
First of all, we've had tremendous waste from the public sector, and that's a result of political parties doing their friends favours, state contracts that have been handed out with the suspicion that lots of bribes have been paid under the table.
We support banks too much. Our government last year got a loan of 28 billion euros, while our deficit from last year is 30 billion euros, just to support the banks.
Greece organized the Olympic Games in 2004. This was the party for the multinationals. They took billions out of that. Greece By participating in the European Union, they had also the party in the stock exchange. They lost billions. Greece is also participating in NATO. Half of the Greek public deficit goes to paying the loans for armaments.
But the chief culprit, perhaps, is the euro.
This isn't just some Greek fault, some Greek problem. The euro is at the heart of it, the way the eurozone has operated.
Kostas argues that far from being a currency which allowed European economies to converge, the euro amplified their differences, with the strongest countries inevitably dominating the weaker.
The surpluses of one were the deficits mirrored in the deficits of the other. That's at the root of the problem. Because these countries were having deficits in the periphery, they had to borrow. So Spain borrowed substantially, Portugal borrowed substantially, Greece borrowed substantially, Ireland borrowed substantially. The periphery was unable to compete, and come 2009, the chickens came home to roost, and the periphery ended up in major crisis.
Yiannos Papantoniou, the finance minister who took Greece into the euro, takes a very different view. He feels the weakness lay in Greece and still believes in the redemptive power of the single European currency.
If Greece had taken advantage of its participation of the euro and proceeded with reforms and with a fiscal discipline necessary and consistent with euro membership, I think now it would be in a reasonable position. Greece lacks a culture of stability and discipline. So if the Greek economy is left to its own devices, then governments follow irresponsible policies, deficits grow, inflation goes out of control, people ask for more and more without these things having a correspondence to the productive potential of the economy, and then we are led into bankruptcy. Even within the Eurozone, we are close to that even now. Imagine what could happen and has happened in the past in the absence of the rigors of a zone like the Eurozone.
You must have suspected, though, that this sort of thing would happen, that the bad old practices would come back after the comfort of entering the Eurozone.
No, frankly, I was carried away with so much enthusiasm after Greece joined the Euro and I signed the entry and the adoption of the Euro that I didn't think in these terms. I thought, on the contrary, that the presence of a modernizing government would reform, so to speak, the political culture of this country. I was proved wrong. But I think a part of the answer lies in the unforeseen incompetence and irresponsibility of the previous government. That was exceptional, even by Greek standards, recruiting unnecessary public employees. And also by the growth of tax evasion, because it didn't want to hit sort of, small entrepreneurs and other tax evaders and turn a blind eye to these excesses.
Accusations of profligacy and nepotism have equally been made against Papantoniou's party, PASOK, which has been in power for the majority of the last 35 years.
Mr. Papantoniou says that he stands by the decision to take Greece into the Eurozone, but the real crisis happened when all the bad practices after joining the Euro came back, and that's where the roots of this crisis are. Would you agree with him?
I disagree. The bad practices have been part of the Greek political scene for very many years.
But didn't entering the Eurozone have an impact initially, on trying to roll back that kind of practice?
Yeah, they tried to roll that back, and then they happily went back to the old ways. And that was the result of two things. First, they had the tools, they could do it. Now, being part of Euro, they could borrow cheaply. They could borrow with the same interest rate as Germans were borrowing. So that made it easier for them to continue the old game of political clientelism and expanding the public sector. So the euro actually did not prevent bad things from happening to Greece. On the contrary, it allowed the politicians to exploit the weaknesses of the eurozone in order to further their own interests, political interests, and bring about the mess we have in Greece today.
Do you think that those days are gone, have to be gone?
Well, everybody says that those days are gone, but then again, I've heard many times in my life this statement, those days are gone, only to see those days repeating themselves.
Politicians have promised change, but the rank and file of their own civil service are skeptical that such a narrow elite will ever mend its ways.
You know that we have a law that protects ministers. If a minister does something which is against the law, something like this, like corruption, you have to find out and go to the justice in 5 years.
So they're immune.
After 5 years, you can't go to jail. You can't go to the justice and accusate a minister for corruption. It's over. Just 5 years. And if we have a government which rules for 4 years, because we have election, it's 4 years, you never have the time to prove and to go to the justice and some one of them to be punished.
This, in essence, is the Greek dilemma. A political elite that is perceived to be self-interested and corrupt, and a financial elite who profit from their links to politics. A demotivating factor for all Greeks. Why should they play fair when their political and financial masters do not?
Our society is probably the most tolerant society I have ever seen in my life, and I have
tolerant to corruption.
Tolerant in general to corruption and to other infractions that maybe the citizens will be doing.
Transparency International evaluates global corruption. In 2009, Greece came in 71st of the 180 countries rated, making it the most corrupt country in the European Union.
The tax evasion is quite big. To give you an idea, the latest estimates by the economists is that 37% of our gross national product is not declared, and that's about 100 billion. If you can extrapolate from that value-added tax and income tax, we could have anywhere between 18 to 20 billion additional income into the coffers of the government. For example, in this area of Kolonaki, and they found at least 150 very important doctors who have been declaring income between 10 and 20,000, which is a ridiculous amount when the income of the office they had, plus the possessions they had in cars or in houses, they had a lot more, and it was difficult to justify.
But isn't it fair to say that a lot of the corruption that you described goes on in a lot of other Western countries?
Italy has quite a bit of tax evasion, and we are probably the champions. Whenever there are scandals in the rest of the world, people are going to jail, they are penalized, and the difference in Greece is that for the moment, the rule of law does not apply.
Given all these problems, the IMF's proposed austerity measures seem to be an exercise in futility. Measures which will stretch the fabric of Greek society to breaking point, but cannot hope to resolve the debt issue.
The IMF's own estimations show that if the current austerity policy is followed through, in 3 years' time, the country's debt will be 150% of GDP. It will actually go up. This is the kind of policy that has been foisted upon the country, and it's obvious, I think, it's clear that it's a policy that basically sustains the debt, doesn't really resolve the debt problem. My own view is that default is not only, in a sense, inevitable and necessary, but it is also desirable.
Why?
Debt is basically crushing the Greek economy at the moment, and given that it is most unlikely for Greece to be able to deal with it in the future by itself, default is a desirable option at this stage.
But what is the cost of defaulting?
Default is not a moral issue. Default is not what it used to be in the past when gunboats would appear and demand payment and so on. It has political implications, to be sure, but in the modern world it has become a policy issue. It's an option.
The sight of empty beaches and quiet tavernas might be a tourist's dream, but they're a finance minister's nightmare. Even before the present problems, this industry had been hit by the global financial crisis. Tourists are still coming in on international flights, but for those traveling by boat, the strikes and violence in Athens have taken their toll. And even Greece's most popular islands are suffering.
There are visitors to Greece, but in nowhere near the numbers that there usually are at this time of year. And the lack of tourists and their hard currency is going to have a significant impact on the Greek economy.
15 million tourists visited Greece in 2009, according to official figures, and tourism accounts for 16% of GDP, Greece's most vital industry and biggest employer after the government. In the bad old days of the drachma, Greece's current crisis would have led to a devaluation of the currency, making Greece a cheap destination for foreign tourists. This, in turn, would have led to a flood of bookings that would have buoyed up the whole economy and restored a degree of equilibrium. One of the reasons some argue for default, which would inevitably lead to Greece being kicked out of the euro and a return to the drachma. Shipping, the other jewel in Greece's crown, has also been a victim of the global financial crisis and the industrial action of recent months. Greek shipping companies control the world's largest merchant fleet, yet account for less than 5% of the Greek GDP. The accusation against this largely family-run industry is that, along with much of the rest of the Greek elite, it does not pay its fair share, taking its profits offshore, registering its ships in tax-free jurisdictions with more lenient labor laws. This might seem like an obvious target for a cash-hungry government, but those in the industry argue they already pay their fair share.
Shipping companies have been constitutionally protected from taxation because they're offshore businesses. Our ships, as I said, have foreign flags, we carry foreign cargoes, and in many cases we have foreign crew. So we are offshore businesses. That's number one. Number two, that's nice. That is tax-free. But the Greek ship owners themselves, not their companies, are getting taxed in Greece. Their employees are getting taxed in Greece. But if tax on shipping starts out of the blue, then for sure the shipping companies will relocate, because then they cannot compete. Many jobs will be lost. A lot of income coming to Greece will be going to Monaco, for example.
But with revenues from its two major industries diminishing, Greece's other options are limited. In March, a German politician caused outrage by suggesting that Greece auctions some of its more attractive islands, but in reality, the country has been quietly selling off far more important assets for some time. In June, it sold Piraeus's main container terminal to the Chinese state shipping company, COSCO.
If you're nearly bankrupt, the last thing you have to be is patriotic. You have to do whatever it takes to get out of the crisis. And to be honest, this is the free economy. If you don't do a job well, you get fired. We're not doing a very good job in running our ports, so we get fired. And the Chinese take over. If I don't do a good job and for my shareholders, they'll put somebody else as CEO. It's as simple as that. What will they say? Because it's a Greek company, we have to have a Greek CEO? No way. You get beaten, you get eaten by the biggest fish. It's a matter of survival. The same with Greece.
This absence of sentiment might be refreshing for the government, but it is not the view of the majority of the population. A new, smaller terminal has been built for the state, but dock workers argue that this is nothing more than window dressing.
It's very easy to see after 2-3 years that the big container terminal that is concessed to COSCO company is going to eat the small one. Because of its capacities, all the shipping companies are going to approach this one.
COSCO's working culture is also very different to the Greek one.
But people who work there, they are very bad paid. Actually, they make contracts with the COSCO company declaring that they're not going to be members of trade unions. They're not going to take part in strikes. So what are their rights as workers? Already it's a month that they're working by themselves, and we have 3 accidents, serious accidents. We don't like strikes. Strikes are negative for everyone, but I don't know any other way to prevent this and to protect our rights. We tried our best. We gained some time, but it was a clear political decision by both parties who are always on power the last 30 years. So if you see a wall, you try to break it, but you're not going to break your head.
This sense of resignation and deep frustration explains much of what has occurred recently in Greece. The unions know that the strikes cannot change government policy, but they have no other course of action. It also potentially explains why some groups on the fringes of politics have given up on demonstrations in favor of more radical action. In June, the aide to the Justice Minister was assassinated by a letter bomb, something which drew barely a murmur from the international press, but which many in Greece see as an escalation.
There's been an attack on the American embassy, so obviously US imperialism is a target. There's been an attack on the stock market, so speculators, banks. There have been many attempts on banks. The parcel bomb, that is a new development. There's never been a parcel bomb in Greek politics before.
The police response is phlegmatic, despite the fact that it was their building that was bombed in an attempt to assassinate their minister.
An aide brought a parcel for the minister over from his political office. Another aide opened it several hours later and it blew up. It was not a targeted attack, and if it hadn't been the minister's aide, it could have been anyone who was killed.
Do you have an idea as to who or what type of organizations may have been behind these attacks?
Not specifically. We don't have a face or a name. At the moment, we have no evidence as to who these people are.
So you don't feel that they're part of an escalation because of the financial crisis? You think they're isolated cases?
These are unconnected events. The deaths of the 3 people killed at the Marathon Bank during a peaceful rally, the death of the 15-year-old Afghan boy, and the 3rd incident here at what is probably the most secure building in the country. We cannot say that the 3 who died at the bank were because of a terrorist hit, simply an anti-establishment act, and hopefully they will be brought to justice. The other 2 killings, no one has claimed responsibility yet. We suspect that behind these 2 murders are the remains of old political groups, which we have successfully dealt with in the past.
Another general strike on the streets of Athens. The 6th of the year and the final one of the summer.
Today's vote is a close vote. Although this is a government elected only 9 months ago, already they are wondering whether it can command a majority, because MPs are influenced by the strike movement. There's a lot of strength in the strikes. We can get results.
Familiar faces in the crowd, both friendly and less so. Given the events of the last few months, it seems unlikely that peace will break out anytime soon.
It is a big fight with the government. The message is very clear. We don't want sacrifices for a future that includes only the profit of the bankers. This struggle will continue, and we are very optimistic that we will win.
But even allowing for the transport strike, there is no getting around the fact that numbers are down.
I'm not disappointed. It's summer, it's hot, we didn't have any transport. I know that people will go on strike, will do everything so that this law will be taken back.
It would be easy to interpret the shrinking demonstrations as a sign that Greece is coming to terms with the austerity measures and that the worst is over. But the anger has not gone away. A passerby mistaken for an undercover policeman is beaten unconscious. With more demonstrations planned for September, this may only be the lull before the storm.
From the beginning of the global economic crisis, politicians around the world warned that if the financial system was not propped up, then chaos would ensue. And yet, despite their best efforts, Greece today shows that the threat of that chaos has not gone away.